Welcome back to another lesson. This lesson we're going to look at sequence, okay? I'm not sure how the best way is to actually teach this, but what we'll do, we're going to use this exercise that we've done previously with assignment. So I'm going to just change the name to sequence and file save as, and instead of example assignment, I just call it sequence. Now, oops, didn't save it. Example sequence. Now the reason why I said that this is a little bit unusual, trying to think about how to do sequence, because you quite often find it easier to do with something like logo programming, where you're doing one instruction and then another. Now we have got a sequence here of instructions, so essentially it's an easy concept. You think that the first thing Python does here is puts this number 15 into storage, and it's got a name for that storage called tax, right? Okay, and then we got a piece of text or a string, and we're putting it into first name, so the computer does that. Then it does all of these ones, and then after that it does this message, then it does this one, and this one. Okay, now we could put all of this into something called a procedure, which you might know as a subprogram, okay? And we're going to do that because that will help us think about sequence a little bit as well. So how do I do it? Well, at the top here, I'm going to leave a couple of lines, and I'm going to write DEF for define, and I'm going to then give this an identifier name for this kind of subprogram or procedure. We'll call it procedure from now on, okay? But it's basically a program within our program. Right, so what's all this related to? Well, this is related to whether you are needing to have a medical or not, okay? So we'll just call it medical info, okay? And open and close brackets, and then two dots, which is that's the colon, okay? This is how we write this. So DEF, then give it a name, whatever name you want, and then open and close brackets and two dots. Now, what we have to do is put all of this into this procedure, okay? So after the two dots, we'll press enter, and then I'm going to just do a comment. This is usual that you would do a comment and say this, we'll just write this procedure. So this procedure outputs medical information. Okay, that's all we're going to say, that this is what all of this code does. Now, all of this we're going to put inside of this procedure, right? That's what we're saying we're going to do. So to do that in Python, we have to indent all of this code. So look here, when I pressed enter after these two dots, this next line was indented from this point, okay? Now, your indentation, if I want whatever code to be part of medical info, this procedure called, this subprogram called medical info, it all needs to be indented from here. So I'm going to grab all of it from the bottom, just selecting all of it all the way up, including that comment, all of this, and I'm going to press the tab key on my keyboard. Now the tab key is above caps lock. Caps lock in Spanish is block mayús, and it's usually a key that's got two arrows pointing in opposite directions from each other. It's also beside the Q on the keyboard, if you don't know where that is, okay? So tab, I just pressed it once, and it's now put all of this code into this procedure, right? And what that means is now that this doesn't get run automatically. So this is going to help us understand a little bit about how sequence works. So I'm going to then run this and press OK. Right, you notice nothing happened, nothing came up, okay? Now I'm running the program, and if I type in medical info, open and close brackets, we can do that. Medical, and you have to make sure you spell it correctly. Open and close brackets, press enter, and you see it's actually running that subprogram. So I've done that here, okay? But as part of the this lesson on sequence, we want to think about how that works in Python. So we can actually, instead of writing this, we can actually write it down here that it will run this procedure. So we'll do that. Just underneath, we'll say medical. And if you have problem with spelling, we could just double click and copy it. So Control C, down here, Control V, and then put the open and close brackets. Now I'm going to put a comment above it saying runs this procedure. Okay, notice it's not indented. It's not indented like this is. Okay, so this is kind of your first lesson about indentation, and you will get problems with your code if it's not indented properly. Okay, if you want all of this code to be part of that procedure, it's got to be indented in underneath here. Okay, so what is going to happen now? Well, if I can close this shell and just get a fresh one to run open. Just run it again, save, and here you go, it runs straight away. So in terms of the sequence that I want to talk about, how has it done this? Well, in actual fact, if you think of Python reading this like you read it, okay, like I'm reading it, like you're reading it, it gets to this first line, okay, we're going to go to the first line, and it says it's a comment, so ignore that, ignore this, there's nothing on this, ignore that, and it gets to this line. So Python then reads this, it doesn't execute it, it doesn't run it or do anything. You're saying define medical info. So as far as Python's concerned, it doesn't know what medical info is. It doesn't know what this procedure is, this subprogram. So it's going to read this. So it will read this and say, right, okay, so we've got a procedure called medical info. What does that do? Well, the next line is a comment, so it just ignores that. The next line is another comment, ignore that. We've got a line of code. It says, make a constant and put 15 into that. So store the number 15, okay? So that's the first thing that medical info does. Then it does this bit. It says, okay, right, so take this string Paul, and so on and so on and so on, and then print these messages out. But it doesn't do any of this. It just knows, Python now knows that that's what medical info does. And then it gets down to here, got another comment which it ignores, and it gets a line of code that says run, or we could call it call this procedure. Okay, call this procedure, which in other words executes. Right, so execute the program, execute this subprogram. So this calls it. So when it gets this instruction to call it, goes back up here and executes all of this code. It actually does it. Python does it. So that's the sequence that's happening here. So it reads this, just reads it all, doesn't actually do it, but when it gets down to here, it's saying, right, do this. So then it goes up and does it. So it reads from the top to the bottom, gets to the bottom, and then goes back up to here and actually executes. So that's our sequence. So run it again, and you can see it just does it again, right? So it's read and knows what medical info does, and then does that. Now subprograms are really powerful, really good to be able to use those, because you might not want to run one subprogram at the beginning of your program. You might want to use it later, or you might want to run this and do it more than once. So we can put everything in a procedure like this, okay?